In the Whyte notation for the classification of steam locomotives, 4-6-2 represents the wheel arrangement of 4 leading wheels on 2 axles, 6 powered and coupled driving wheels on 3 axles, and 2 trailing wheels on 1 axle. The 4-6-2 locomotive became almost globally known as the Pacific type. Other equivalent classifications are UIC classification 2C1, French classification 231, Turkish classification 36, Swiss classification 3/6, Russian classification 231. Overview. The introduction of the 4-6-2 design in 1901 has been described as a veritable milestone in locomotive progress. On many railways worldwide, Pacific steam locomotives provided the motive power for express passenger trains throughout much of the early to mid-20th century, before either being superseded by larger types in the late 1940s and 1950s, or replaced by electric or diesel-electric locomotives during the 1950s and 1960s. Nevertheless, new Pacific designs continued to be built until the mid-1950s. The type is generally considered to be an enlargement of the 4-4-2 Atlantic type, although its prototype had a direct relationship to the 4-6-0 Wheeler and Prairie, effectively being a combination of the two types. The success of the type can be attributed to a combination of its 4-wheel leading truck, which provided better stability at speed than a 2-6-2 Prairie, the 6 driving wheels which allowed for a larger boiler and the application of more tractive effort than the earlier 4-4-2 Atlantic, and the 2-wheel trailing truck, used wisely on the New Zealand 2-6-2 Prairie of 1885, which permitted the firebox to be sited behind the high driving wheels, thereby allowing it to be both wide and deep. Unlike the 4-6-0 Wheeler, which had either a narrow and deep firebox between the driving wheels or a wide and shallow one above, the type is well suited to high-speed running. The world's speed record for steam traction of 126 miles per hour has been held by a British Pacific locomotive, the Mallard, since the 3rd of July 1938. Development. The two earliest 4-6-2 locomotives, both created in the United States of America, were experimental designs which were not perpetuated. In 1887, the Lehigh Valley Railroad experimented with a 4-6-0 Wheeler design with a Strong's patent firebox, a cylindrical device behind the cab which required an extension of the frame and the addition of 2 trailing wheels to support it. In 1889, the Chicago, Milwaukee and St. Paul Railway rebuilt a conventional 4-6-0 with trailing wheels as a means of reducing its axle load. In 1896, 6 Q-class 4-6-2 T-tank locomotives were introduced on the Western Australian government railways. The first true Pacific, designed as such with a large firebox, was ordered in 1901 by the New Zealand Railways Department from the Baldwin Locomotive Works of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The NZR Chief Mechanical Engineer A.L. Beatty ordered 13 new Q-class locomotives with a sufficiently large firebox that would be able to efficiently burn poor-grade lignite coal from East and South Island mines. Even before Baldwin had completed the order from New Zealand, their engineers realized the advantages of the new type and incorporated it into the standard designs for other customers. The design was soon widely adopted by designers throughout the world. Origin of the name. There are different opinions concerning the origin of the name Pacific. The design was a natural enlargement of the existing Baldwin 4-4-2 Atlantic type. but the type name may also be in recognition of the fact that a New Zealand designer had first proposed it. Usually, however, new wheel arrangements were named for, or named by, the railroad which first used the type in the United States. In the case of the Pacific, that was the Missouri Pacific Railroad in 1902. In the Cape Colony in South Africa, the first 462 locomotives, delivered from Kitson and Company in 1903, were designated the Karoo class. For the region of the Cape Western system of the Cape Government Railways that they were designed to work in. Global popularity. The Pacific type was used on mainline railways around the world. The railways of New Zealand and Australia were the first in the world to run large numbers of Pacific locomotives, having introduced 462 types in 1901 and 1902 respectively, and operating them until the 1960s. During the first half of the 20th century, the Pacific rapidly became the predominant passenger steam power in North America. Between 1902 and 1930, about 6,800 locomotives of the type were built by North American manufacturers for service in the USA and Canada, with exported locomotives included. About 7,300 were built in total. About 45% of these were built by the American Locomotive Company, which became the main builder of the type, and 28% by Baldwin. Large numbers were also used in South America, most of which were supplied by manufacturers in the United Kingdom, the USA and Germany. Africa was the third continent upon which the Pacific was regularly used. Following the introduction of the Karoo class on the Cape Government Railways in the Cape Colony in 1903, the earliest African examples were built in the UK by Kitson and Company. The earliest examples of the Pacific in Europe were two French prototypes, introduced in 1907 and designed by the Compagnie du Chemin de Fer de Paris et Orléans to overcome the insufficient power of the 442 Atlantics. Within a few weeks these were followed by a German Pacific type that, although already designed in 1905, only entered service in late 1907. The next was a British type, introduced in January 1908. By the outbreak of the First World War, the type was being widely used on the railways of continental Europe. The Pacific type was introduced into Asia in 1907, the same year that it was first used in Europe. By the 1920s, Pacifics were being used by many railways throughout the Asian continent. In 1923, the Pacific gave its name to Arthur Honegger's orchestral work, Pacific 231, which successfully reflectively interprets the emotive sounds of a steam locomotive. Tank locomotives. During the first 2 decades of the 20th century, the Pacific wheel arrangement enjoyed limited popularity on tank locomotives. On a 462T locomotive, the trailing wheels support the coal bunker rather than an enlarged firebox, and such a locomotive is therefore actually a tank engine version of the 460-10-wheeler tender locomotive. Indeed, many of the earliest examples were either rebuilt from tender locomotives or shared the basic design. Around 1920 it became apparent to designers that the 462T wheel arrangement allowed a too limited bunker size for most purposes, with the result that most later designs of large suburban tank classes were of the 464T Hudson or 264T Adriatic wheel arrangement. Lifespan. The Pacific became the major express passenger locomotive type on many railways throughout the 1920s, 1930s and 1940s. Examples were also built for fast freight and mixed traffic duties. However, due to the increasing weight of trains during the 1940s, larger developments of the type became necessary in the USA and elsewhere. The most notable of these was the 464 Hudson, a Baltic type, which had a stiffer wheel trailing bogie that permitted an even larger firebox, albeit at a loss of some adhesive weight, and the 482 mountain type, which used an extra pair of driving wheels to deliver more tractive effort to the rails. Nevertheless, the Pacific type remained widely used on express passenger trains until the end of steam traction. The last examples were built in the UK and Japan in the mid-1950s. British Railways introduced its standard Class 6 and Class 7 designs in 1951 and 1952, and the final UK design, the standard Class 8, in 1954. However, the story of the 462 type did not end in the 1960s. One further mainline example of the LNER Peppercorn Class A1 60,163 Tornado was completed at Darlington by the A1 Steam Locomotive Trust in 2008. Designed to meet modern safety and certification standards, Tornado runs on the UK rail network and on mainline connected heritage railways.